Hey, it's Vicky here with another episode of the Dublin Maker Podcast. Dublin Maker is an annual family-friendly maker festival funded by Science Foundation Ireland. Today I have Reina, Pamela O'Brien and Hassan Dabbagh. We also have Tomas Ward from the Dublin Maker team co-hosting this morning. So, Chris, Pam and Hassan, welcome to our podcast and thanks for joining us for a chat.
Thanks, Vicky. Cheers.
Thanks for having us.
Let's start off easy and just say, tell us a bit about MakerMeet for those who have not heard of your organisation before and a bit about yourself.
I suppose if the guys would let me jump in on this one, MakerMeet is about makers meeting educators or educators meeting makers, and it's about the realization that teachers have been makers since the dawn of time. Like ever since the classroom, ever since the first Christmas card was made in the classroom, teachers have been makers. And what we started doing is realizing that with teachers. One of our first events was in ICT EDU, and it's learning by making, and that's really what we're about, and we're about promoting that. I mean, you could go deeper into it and you can go it's project-based learning, but just at the starting point, getting off the block, we're about learning by making.
Cool. So I suppose just a little bit about yourself, Chris, Pamela, and Hassan as well.
Yeah, so I'm Reina, and I suppose in my general bios and things like that, I kind of have decided at this point in my life that I've been making for perhaps around the last 50 odd years. Given the fact that I'm only 51 now, that's pretty good. So I kind of over my whole life, I've been doing lots of different things, everything from creating films to graphic design, making Christmas cards in classrooms. And that was both when I was young and as I got older with the students themselves. So all of that entails making everything from even cooking and electronics and sometimes mixing all of those things together. So at the moment, as Has pointed out, that we go around to lots of different educational institutions and kind of give workshops, I suppose, and hopefully kind of encourage younger people to make things and to explore and to figure out how the world works by making stuff.
Cool. Pamela, would you like to jump in to introduce yourself?
Yeah. So I'm Pam O'Brien. I'm a lecturer in LIT, Limerick Institute of Technology. Hassan has already mentioned the ICT Education Conference, and I suppose this is where MakerMeet kind of started. I would have been heavily influenced by the late, great Bianca Grogan. As part of a pre-conference event, we would have had a teach meet over a number of years, and in I think it was 2014, you know, Bianca would always have been very into kind of making and, you know, that physical, you know, learning by doing and making and all of that. So I think it was herself and Max Almond who suggested that maybe we take that pre-conference meet into more a kind of a maker type event. And that's where it started. So it's been really just about kind of tinkering and, you know, just learning by making, specifically for educators. You know, you're very much involved in the maker movement. I suppose we're trying to, as Has said, we're trying to bring that into the education sphere. And so, yeah, the full-time job is lecturer in LIT, but I'm a part-time facilitator with MakerMeet as well.
And a full-time origami maker.
Absolutely, especially during lockdown.
And you, Hassan?
I've worked with Chris for years and years on and off. I'm an IT guy, so most of my days are spent turning stuff off and back on again. And I work only with schools. So I had a real job before this where I worked with Chris deploying iPads into schools and using iPads as a teaching and learning tool. And I was the one that said, yes, the iPad can do this, and yes, the iPad can do that. And then I'd go over to Chris and he'd say, Has, I don't know if it can entirely do that. And so our relationship was born. Like, we've been working together on and off for 10 years.
Yeah.
But over the last few years, I realized that schools, were buying all this equipment, but they weren't using it because they were using excuses like, oh, I haven't got the time, or I haven't got the training, or I haven't got this or that. And my girlfriend at the time, now long-suffering wife, said, well, make a difference. Go, you train them. Nobody else is doing this in this field. You go into schools, knock on the door and tell them this is what you're going to do. And that's what I did. I went bag in hand and I said, look, I know at the time there was your dole plus 50 euros or something. And I said, look, I want to be your trainer. I want to be your in-house educational technologist. That's what I want to be. And that starts off with showing them how to turn stuff on and off again, and ends up with going to conferences and then joining the dots again, meeting Pam O'Brien, meeting Chris again. And when you meet the guy so many times, you have to go, do you know what, we're going to have to work together. And that's it in a nutshell.
Very good. I just want to ask a quick question there. At the start there, it was interesting that you just highlighted, I suppose, making as learning and the important role, I suppose, that schools have in facilitating that potentially. And growing up, I was always struck by how national school teachers in particular were wonderful sources of opportunity as a child, as I was then, to experiment and to make and to go off the syllabus a bit in terms of taking risk. And I wonder, is that still the case? Because it's a long time since I was in primary school, but is that still the case? Have you seen any changes over the years in terms of the, I suppose, the appetite for taking risk in national school settings?
Yeah, I suppose for me that what I find is kind of, Pam can certainly speak to third level, and Hass can speak to both, and I can probably speak to all of them, perhaps, giving workshops in them. I find in the primary that, yes, very much teachers are extremely open to going off book, as you say, off syllabus, and finding different ways to actually deliver content to the students, and more inventive ways, and perhaps more encouraging and progressive ways. Unfortunately, I found in maybe second level, that's slightly less so. It seems to be more geared towards exams and things like that. Now, that is changing, but I think it's changing a lot slower in second level.
Yeah, but that is a problem, Chris, I think.
I agree 100%. It's a huge problem, in fact, actually, because a number of years ago, as Hasp said, the idea of going around to different places and deploying equipment, it was education, but there were also there was also enterprise level institutions. And over the course of a number of years, I've spoken to a number of enterprise level institutions who are no longer happy to get new recruits, I suppose, who have just been churned out of both second level and third level as clones of each other. What they want people who are original thinkers, because they're more valuable employees, because their business may change, their business model may change sometime in the next, quarter of this particular year, and it can change that quickly. And the employee that does the same job as 100 other people is less valuable than the employee that can stick with a company, due to retraining and staffing and things like that. So it's a very interesting market, I suppose, and a very interesting way that we've entered into in terms of education, trying to get people to use the old Apple catchphrase of think different,
But isn't it interesting that we start out with an education system at national school level where the kids are coming in incredibly creative. Many of the teachers are supportive of that, and then we begin to lose it towards the end of national school, and then we completely lose it, in my opinion, in secondary school, or at least to some degree. And then people like Pamela and myself at third level desperately scrambling to try and recover it within the structures of the programs available to us. But it sounds like if we just carried on as we were doing at national school level, we'd probably be far better positioned right now.
And
can I just jump in a little bit there, if you don't mind? Just, I suppose, to pick up on what both Chris and Tomas have said, I suppose one of the things, my two children are, one of them has left secondary school, the other is just about to go into Leaving Cert. God help us all for the next year, but anyway, we'll see how that goes. But I suppose my observation, and I've seen across primary, secondary and third level, through my work in LIT, I work with primary schools, secondary schools, both students and teachers, and also obviously with my own students, and now we're working with teachers to upskill in computer science. One of the things I've seen, particularly in primary school, and I think the reason it works particularly well in primary school, and I suppose not so well in secondary and potentially third level, although I would argue that there's changes coming there and there is a lot happening.
Mm-hmm.
I think the key thing in primary school is you've got primarily one teacher who is teaching everything. So actually they can tie everything in across, so they can do a truly cross-curricular project.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah.
Whereas I think in secondary school, I think the teachers are very hamstrung because they're very tied to their subject. And it's very difficult. Like I even see with my colleagues, we try to work across the modules, but it takes a good bit of work to do that. And I think particularly in the second level system, having seen my own children go through it, it's gone so focused on the terminal exam. And that's not, any one person's fault, but I think parents have a part to play. I think the students themselves have a part to play. Obviously, the system has a part to play. So I think it's as much about the system as it is about everything else, because I think when you chop everything down into its constituent part, you miss the joy of, STEM. We talk about STEM all the time, but yet when you go into secondary school, you've got science as a separate subject, you've got maths as a separate subject, you've got technology now coming into some schools, but not into a huge number of schools. So actually STEM as an idea is great, but in our second level system, STEM is down to people bringing it together in as much as they can, given the very tight constraints they find themselves in. So I think we have a little bit of looking to do to see how can we take that creativity, because I've seen it in my own children, the creativity is almost beaten people as they go through the system, which is a thing to say about our education system, which, it's just hard to see that joy. And that's what the Maker movement is for me. That's what MakerMeet is for me. That's what going to Dublin Maker is for me. It's having all those flocks of people coming to actually make something as simple as, 2 years ago, I think in Dublin Maker, Chris, we were making the edible.
That's right. Yeah.
It was basically bread and food coloring.
Yeah.
The number of people who came to our stall that day and did that, we're missing a trick somewhere along the line, because it's the simplicity of it. And I think, primary school classrooms are maker spaces in and of themselves. The creativity that you find in there, it's fabulous to see. We need to get a little bit more of that back into everything we do.
And I think, Pam, just to add to your point there, I never actually thought about the one teacher teaching everything, which is mind blown. I just put two and two together, so thank you very much.
Good.
But
we aim to please.
You blow my mind, Pam, every day.
There you go.
But in secondary schools, which is where I spend most of my time, what I find is it's down to a simple lack of communication. And again, there's no fault. It's just the way it is. I have sat down on one side of me, I have a computer science teacher or a coding teacher, and on the other side of me had the technology teacher. And the technology teacher will be talking to me about using Java or coding or a microbit or something. And the computer science teacher will be beside me talking about how to implement a microbit or how to deploy a microbit into his classroom. And I'm going, well, lads, why don't you talk to each other? Because you're both teachers in the one school. So if the technology teacher is building robots for a junior cert project, and then that student leaves technology and goes down to do computers, it's automatically your thought to think that they're two separate entities. But really, if we took a leaf out of primary schools and opened it up instead of sandboxed all the subjects, I think we'd be doing well. I think that'd be a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I couldn't but agree with that. You know, and I think the proof for that anybody may need for that is if you is quite frankly an excellent example is Dublin Maker itself. You know, any year that we've ever attended, and we get students of a secondary school age group come up to us, and we put something into their hands and then get them to do something, whether it's a marble run, whether it's circuits, whether it's connectivity, it really doesn't matter what it is. And then we explain to them the theory behind it and say, well, this is, you know, part of a concept or part of, you know, science or part of engineering or anything. Their face changes dramatically, absolutely dramatically, because they've enjoyed that experience. And I can't look, I never followed anybody else into their classroom afterwards, but I can't help but think that that tiny 2 minutes that we spent with that person, showing them something physical in their hands and getting them to make something, sticks in their brain far better than a textbook does. And that's not, of course, true. I'm all in favor of textbooks, but I do think to an extent that we just as a human race, we tend to remember things physical more than we do by reading things. And that's not true for everybody, of course, but by and large, I think that is true.
All everyone's saying is just triggered by memory of when I was in secondary school doing my art class. That was one of my most favourite times because I had a very good art teacher who let us do anything, experiment with anything we want, with all different mediums, encouraged us, and created projects, and that stuck in my mind like many years later, you know. So unfortunately my creativity kind of went on the, you know, side burner as I went through college, then, you know, work and stuff. So I'm not as I keep looking, saying, how do I do that? And oh, it's so simple. Whenever you put something in front of me, you explain. Like whenever I bump into Chris in various events, you're telling me about things and my mind gets blown. And so why didn't I think of that? That is so super cool. Or how do I, you know, so yeah, I think that is like so important, you know, besides just the textbooks, having to do something for even like bringing art and bringing all the, you know, technology together, because at the end of the day, you know, you mentioned STEM, but I would say STEAM a lot myself, to bring in the arts. And it's so important to try and bring these kind of various areas together, I suppose, you know, as early as possible. But again, it is very hard. Because I have no experience on, I can understand if it's really hard for all the teachers trying to cooperate, especially in second level, when they have so many students and they only have their own subjects to focus on. There's so much to do, I suppose, to get more creativity in the classrooms and introduce, especially as the kids become teens and as they, you know, go into college and go out as well, how to be more creative in their thinking. I suppose this leads into, like, you know, you bring a lot of projects, you go to a lot of events and conferences, and how do you find all these ideas? Like, I know, Chris, you said you've been making for a for a long time, but where did you come up with these ideas? I said, you kind of blow my mind every time I talk to you, you know, there's lots of cool things, you know, and I said, why didn't I think of that? Where did you come up, or did you just come across it, or did you say, light bulb just pops up and say, let me try this?
It's kind of, yeah, it's, I suppose there's sources and resources that, you know, you can always look towards, but I think, you know, perhaps maybe a very long time ago when I was quite young, a phrase stuck in my head from Gary Larson, who is he does the Far Side cartoon, and someone asked him a similar question, you know, which they would often ask lots of people, which is, where do you get your ideas from? And his response, I still remember to this day, his response was, well, from life. You know, every single thing around me, you know, prompts something. And I think that's, you know, probably my particular answer to that question, which is I'm deeply interested in how things work. And I don't necessarily mean how does a car work, how does a piece of electronic equipment work, although that certainly fits into it as well. But it's how do people work? How do people work? How do systems work? How does the government work? How does the education system work? How does cutting the grass work? How do other animals who I have absolutely no experience nor education in, when I look at the birds out of the window, their interactions and how do they work and how do they do a thing? And it's kind of remembering bits of everything. It's not one thing, and then putting those bits together. And fortunately, I've been guided in the direction by both Hass and Pam very much in simplifying my thought process, because I tend to go to the extreme immediately for everything, and then the two of them pull me back, and then that in turn pulls out some sort of a project, whether it's how to build a bridge to get a robotic car to go over, or whether it's a marble run. It doesn't really matter what it is and how to change it, but how to then simplify that and then explain that to someone else. So I tend to look at myself as a conduit of taking lots of stuff from lots of places, filtering it through me, that being edited by Hass and Pam, and then pushing that forward on to students and things like that. So, I'm sure Hass, Pam would have different ways of looking at things, perhaps.
Do you know what, Vicky? Where he gets the ideas from, nobody knows. Nobody.
Not even me.
Yeah. But the best ideas Chris has had is when we've stayed quiet. So we get on a conference call and it starts with hello and how are you? And by the way, it also works that we're good friends. Find a job you love and work with people you love, and you'll never work a day in your life. And that's just fact when you're working with these two lunatics. So the conversation starts with Chris wanting to do a project based on fire. And Pam will go, no, Chris, back that up now, reverse that up. But it will end with something, more often than not, where we'd all three of us would look back and go, oh God, that worked. So yeah, Chris, let him off. You wind him up and you just go. And you pick one of those ideas.
I resemble that remark.
And then what happens is you end up driving from Nina to Adair on a Sunday morning with your daughter to make a geodesic dome with Chris and his son. And then you hawk that same geodesic dome to Maker Faire Rome, and you put it up there. But this is what it's all about. And I think, to pick up on what both Hass and Chris have said, it is about bouncing ideas off each other. I'm not hugely an ideas person, I don't think, although I'm becoming more of that. Being surrounded by these two lunatics, as Hass says, it does rub off on you after a while. But I think it's just that idea of just being around people who bring out that side of you. It's really important to do that. And I think that's the joy in what we do. I think it's probably obvious that we do enjoy each other's company as well. We are good friends behind it all. And that, just all that in the mix, just does help with that creativity and the coming up with ideas and the, as you say, tempering the ideas. And it's about, when somebody has an idea, you kind of help them to maybe see how it can work a little bit better, or things like that. But it's about all working together, and that's really what MakerMeet is about.
Absolutely. And I would, the only thing I would add to that then is being given the space to do that in as well. It's, again, as both Pam and Hass were saying, it's really important that, that we do get on well. We do, we feed each other information and we receive information from each other. And, I'll come up with some harebrained, completely mad idea, as Pam has said, and, it'll be tempered, and I think that's ironically a really interesting way to look at something, because if you make anything in fire, as Hass pointed out, you have to temper the steel or things like that, and you don't just throw it in and pull it out and it's done. You have to start from the beginning, and you have to guide it, and you have to change it as it goes. And sometimes maybe you put something in looking to build a sword in the fire, and what you get out is instead a completely different piece of artwork and something like that. But it's important to recognize those sorts of things as well too, and you can see sometimes how things move along and how to change it. There'd be many times where I would pick up something and think, oh, that's going to be a very interesting project, and in reality it doesn't turn out to be that at all. It turns out to be something completely different.
So that's very interesting, folks. I'm hearing themes of community, friendship, curiosity, risk-taking, some element of process of control, not too much, and but as it overall, it's eclecticism and having kind of encouraging interest in all sorts of areas and seeing where things go, and that's something I think Vicky, myself, and everyone actually in Dublin Maker would resonate with. So I was going to ask you, how do we create a world or a community in Ireland where there's more Pamelas, Chris, and Hassans doing these sort of things? What are the barriers or obstacles that you see currently that prevents, maybe you operating at a greater scale, or there being a greater community with like-minded ideas, maybe having impact in an educational context? Now, you might tell me, Tomas, it's already happening, but maybe you can tell us what you think of that.
Guys, if you don't mind, I'll jump in here.
Of course, yeah.
I think the spaces, I think Pam and Chris covered it nicely. It's been given the space. So sustainable maker spaces dotted around the country, whether they be in libraries, colleges, community-based, sustainable, and I'm using the air inverted commas here, sustainable spaces. I think that's key, and that will encourage more Pams, more Hassans, more Chris's, although you don't want too many Chris's.
There's a limit to how many Chris's.
Yeah, there can be only one, to be fair. But I think those sort of spaces around the country would encourage more of that, and you're seeing it a little bit now. But Pam could easily talk to us about Coder Dojo, but those kind of creative spaces will encourage more project-based thinking. It's how we make it sustainable. That's the key, and that's something I'm working on here in Mayo, and it's an ongoing project. But I always look at what Dublin Maker are doing, and if we could if we could replicate the energy from Dublin Maker and put that around the country, yeah, that's the dream. Chris?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, you're absolutely right in all of that. Tomas asked, in terms of what are the kind of, barriers in place for things like that. Really, I think the biggest barrier is probably fear, which is quite sad in its own way. But again, we talked earlier about, primary schools encouraging students to explore and things like that, and then you go into the second level and you're not so much encouraged perhaps to explore, as Vicky even said in their experience, and then suddenly you're into third level, and then there's a job is looming ahead, and kind of big boy pants and life and all of that sort of thing takes over. And I think we're not encouraged often enough to allow ourselves to explore the benefits of that. And I mean, Tomas's other part of that question was in terms of, how can we replicate that? How can we move that forward? And I think that's an awful lot to do with it, which is show people the benefits of making. It's not just that you've made a little thing and it's lovely and that's great, but it's changed a little synapses in your brain that now allows you to think perhaps a little bit differently about something. And, so, I mean, I'm consistently reminded of a colloquial story where I met a chap on the side of the road. We were chatting away, and I kind of knew him a little bit, and he was chatting to me, and he's an electrician. and he had gone over to visit his friend. And while he was there, his friend's mother said to him, would he be able to change a bulb there? And he said, well, of course, no problem, but it's just a light bulb kind of thing. And she said, oh yeah, well, you're an electrician, you'd know better how to do it. And it was just changing a light bulb. And I do think a little bit that, perhaps from time to time, we don't explore things enough. And I think that might be a good example of not exploring something enough, taking ownership of what we do, not only taking ownership, but exploring a little bit within, obviously, reason. If that light bulb had bare wires hanging out of it, that would be a very bad thing. But, I think that we could probably all change light bulbs for ourselves more often.
That kind of reminded me of a story my dad told me of his mom, so my grandmother. And she always has ways to kind of solve little problems, little things. Like, my family originally from Hong Kong, so my dad used to live in a flat. And I don't know if you've seen, probably now you still see people hanging clothes outside the buildings, but in old Hong Kong, you'll see the, clothes swaying outside. They're on bamboo canes, so you're out the window and there's a few rows of bamboo canes, and then you have, they're very thick ones, and you have your clothes hung up there, right? But then when it rains, you have to take all these rungs back in, and it's a lot of effort. So what she ended up doing was getting some, the hangers, one of the the kind of metal hangers, take that and make it, straighten that up, and then she created got some kind of cover, kind of one of those plastic kind of covers or canvas covers, and she kind of quickly, created a cover for the clothes. So whenever it rains, she can actually push it across the canvas cover. She made something just to solve a problem, even things like that, ad hoc things. And she's always been, Dad's always telling me stories of her solving little problems like that around the household, and things like they have a shop downstairs as well, and she does a lot of sewing and things like that. So a lot of things are people, I say in the past that they make a lot of things, but it's normal to solve problems and make things. I suppose that's the same with everyone, especially when you don't have a lot of money, and we have, we're quite privileged now. We have a lot of things that we can just buy, and a lot of things hanging around the house. But even back then, you just have to find something, to try and solve a problem that you can't just head out to shops and buy and solve it. When you don't have as much options, the same with kids. Nowadays kids get tons of toys, and there's so much options, you don't know what to play when they don't play with anything. Whereas, back then you make these toys and you cherish them a bit. We kind of lost something along the way, where we just, even changing a light bulb seems to be, really hard thing to do, where everyone has a wee bit of a maker inside them. And and that, obviously, as Chris said, unless there's wires hanging out the bare wires, probably do get an electrician in, because if you're not very good.
Absolutely.
Vicky, have you noticed that, or have you all noticed, since lockdown, there's been, everybody's has to some degree turned into a sort of Renaissance person, because everything from bicycle repair shops are closed to
sourdough
bread, yeah.
An ability to get bread. The amount of people that I've seen that have suddenly discovered, or who are now taking risks because they have to, everything from creating their own yeast to repairing a puncture on their bicycle. How many people I used to know that I know that bring their bicycle to the bike shop if they've simply got a puncture?
Yeah, of course, sure. This is, and I mean, I think that both what you're saying, Tomas, and Vicky as well, is that quite a lot of it does come from necessity, regardless of whether that's availability of something or financial, and I do think there's a minor element perhaps in society, which I don't purport to know how to solve in any way, but whereby we've kind of gotten into a sort of area where everything is available to us, as you said, Vicky, and it's frequently much easier to go out and purchase something, or just to pick it up rather than fix it, or rather than do. And that's certainly has, will jump in with that. I know, in terms of fixing computers and things, it's the price of things is much cheaper to just buy a new one, but that doesn't make it the right thing to do either. You certainly, in the era of inkjet printers, I am guilty of this, of literally purchasing a brand new inkjet printer because it was cheaper to get the ink with it than it was to actually buy new ink. So it's just daft.
Well, the incentivization there, you can see why you would have done that. So, but yeah, that's
it is. It's amazing. And yet, I'll tell you, only this morning I watched a video of a gentleman. He's based in Switzerland, actually, very interesting chap. And he's a maker. And his video was taking old power supply units from computers and servers and transforming them into power supply units, but for any other project, and simply by using the pinouts on the power supply. And it's really fascinating how easy it is to do. I have in my own shed currently at the moment rather a number of laptops, monitors, and things like that, because about 2 years ago now, I discovered that all of the connections to laptop monitors and other monitors on any kind of a computer, there's only really about a half a dozen of them on the whole world, on the planet. And if you get those connections, so if you have a laptop that stopped working, don't throw the laptop away. Take the monitor off the laptop, because the monitor still works, and all you need is the correct connection to connect that 15-inch laptop monitor to HDMI or VGA or whatever connection you like. And that's, I think, a good way to repurpose things and reuse them.
That's very interesting. I think, Vicky, we must have a podcast on kind of repair culture in the future. I find that really, really compelling. There's some good stories there.
Yeah, quite right.
And necessity, it all comes down to necessity, as you said, that can encourage people. But of course, necessity now might be broader than just maybe financial and availability reasons. I think in the future, because sustainability is something that's really important, and so and increasingly so we might see necessity broadening out to encompass sustainability in the future, where people will repair things not because it's the cheaper thing to do, because in many cases it won't be, but because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, and that I think is making very much societally a big input or a big push in society, again, for sustainability, correct eco disposal of products and reuse of products and things like that. Because I think perhaps on a worldwide basis, or at least I hope so, people are realizing that resources are limited. When you see large ocean liners traveling around the world on a consistent basis because they have nowhere to put their rubbish, that's a hint and a half for all of society, I think.
And all the different smartphones that come out every 2-3 months or something like that. Like with the COVID-19, it was really interesting that how manufacturing stopped for a month or something, and the whole world didn't fall over themselves that we didn't have our latest electronics.
Yeah.
So consumerism is this stalled, which is good, because people kind of fear of missing out on a new thing all the time, and we're throwing away things or hand-me-downs, and then they get thrown away because and the cycle keeps going in a bad way. And I think it is very important to a lot of the stuff that we buy can last a lot longer. And obviously, I'm on that boat, like shiny thing. If you can get it, and experiment with it. But yeah, I think good and bad about the COVID-19, it has taught a lot of things. It's been not just on the personal level and how important it is to look after yourselves and well-being, but also how we buy things, and from anything from food, with people growing your own. I just potted a few herbs. I've converted a fish tank which has been not used for ages to to one of those terrariums now. So
Nice.
since it was really bad, the weather, so I
And
said,
what's that, Vicky? What's a
it's
terrarium?
it's a literally, think of a an empty fish tank. It still has lights and stuff on it, and it's quite warm. So normally you would turn it into like something for like, I don't have heat lamps or anything like what you would use for it for lizards and snakes. No, so that would be a terrarium.
Oh,
But what I did was, instead I just have an empty fish tank. It's already cleaned, so I just put my potted herbs in there, and it needs light. The house is warm enough as it is, so I just, hopefully that is warm enough for the herbs. It's only a few days ago, so it'll be another week or so before it sprouts. So I'm trying to grow my own as well, like herbs, because I just got myself a huge planter. I didn't build one myself, but I supported a local
excellent.
business that did, and they delivered that. So I'm growing like my own vegetables. So there's a Grow Your Own not-for-profit charity here in Dublin, and they were setting out seeds for Grow It Forward. So they have beetroot, carrots, and stuff. So I decided to get those as well, and they're all sprouting, and I need to get my planter ready. So there's a lot of these things where, from looking after yourself to actually growing your own stuff, besides baking your own bread, and which is hard because there's no yeast anywhere. It's very hard to get hold of yeast anyway. Maybe we should drink more to get the people to
Yes,
brew more beer so we can
That's
I'm
drink
right.
all
more
over
That's
beer.
right.
that.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. That's an excellent suggestion.
Yes, for me as well.
Yeah.
So
I want to start
um,
that now.
so there's like a lot of good things as well that we learned about ourselves from this unfortunate kind of pandemic, which is affecting so many people around the world. And I've learned practical skills. Like, I have to go back and try and play around with my sewing machine. Like, I have no clue how to use a sewing machine, before the pandemic. I didn't even know how to put a spool together and put it in, where all the things go. So there's a lot of things that, both electronics and physical kind of things that I learned. So making, as I said, everyone has a bit, from what I've seen from like social media, from the news, from everything, everyone has done something that they wouldn't have done before before we end up being locked down. We had to be locked down in our houses to learn to make stuff.
Well, if that's what it takes, we should just continue with that, I think.
We were all grounded. That's what we were. We were grounded for causing so much pollution. And we have to learn to go back to the basics. So yeah.
That grounding has been good, I think, for a lot of people, me included.
Yes. Do you want to? Yeah, Pamela. How is it positively impacted you in terms of how you work and the?
Well, interestingly, my work-life balance has gotten better since lockdown, which is unusual. I know.
Yes, I was going to say mine has got worse, but so please share. I want to hear this.
I've been very strict, I suppose, about creating a work-life balance, given that everything happens at home now. So
Right.
I would have been.
That's what I lack. Thanks, Pamela.
Well, actually, how I've done it is I've started walking. So now it's not so much now; it's kind of blurring a little bit now. But when I was on the 12th of March, we got the call that everything was closing down. I left work that day, driving home, thinking, "How is this going to work?" All four of us at home, all that jazz going on. So to counteract it, I very firmly decided to take a walk every evening around 5 or half 5 with my daughter, to get both of us out of the house, but also to kind of mark the end of my day, my working day, which I wouldn't have done before. So for the previous 20 years, I would have done, as my children were very small, I would have done a lot of my prep for work, for lecturing at night time. And I very firmly decided I wasn't going to continue that. And it has worked very well for me. Now, it's put me under pressure during the day at times, but
Yeah.
there have been exceptions along the way. But for the most part, my working day now is the day rather than what I was doing. I've been baking, I've been walking, I've been doing all that stuff, and it's been really good, because I think we get into that rat race of just doing constantly. And I was very much doing that in the last few years, constantly on the go, constantly doing things, and actually not stopping to say, why are you doing it? What are you doing? What's it for? It's been really good.
So your curiosity, when you had time to reflect, or maybe you didn't have time to reflect, but this situation caused you to reflect and think and exercise your curiosity and interest about your own life and re-engineer your own life. You hacked your own life.
I suppose one of the things, my father-in-law died suddenly at the beginning of this year, which I think when something like that happens, it tends to give you a stopping point anyway. So I think when COVID hit, you know, you kind of, a lot of that stuff goes around in your head, and, you know, there was all that thing going on, and it just makes you stop and think, oh, why are you doing what you're doing? And it gave me that chance to do that. And yeah, it's been good to reflect on it. Now I can see it seeping, and, you know, officially I'm supposedly on holidays at the moment, and I've probably never been busier. But I do keep it during the day, and I do keep it to certain days, because I think it is important to keep that balance, and, you know, to show that to your children so that they can see a little bit of balance, which I didn't have. I put my hands up. I absolutely didn't have that balance, particularly in the last few years. That's
very interesting. Again, it's just, you know, you took a real interest in how you were doing things and how you might do things better, and this opportunity then afforded you an ability to make those changes, and discipline. Now you need to sustain that discipline to keep those changes. That'll be interesting. Very easy to slide back into it. And absolutely. And then Hassan, how is your life? Would you have any similar reflections on how you've worked?
Do you know what? I'm with Pam on this, in that my work-life balance has improved and my productivity has gone up. Now, you'd always like productivity to go a bit higher, but it has definitely gone up in that there's structure now. So repeating what Pam said, there's a time to do everything. And I've included the time to go for a walk and the time to go for a cycle. And I've included the time to do non-work stuff. But a friend of mine recently, was talking to him online. He lives in a 1-bedroom apartment. And I said, well, he works from home. I asked him, I said, what do you do when you finish work? He said, well, I get up from this seat and I sit in that seat.
So, I know where that goes.
Yeah. So listening to that, I kind of went, well, no, when I finish work, that's it. I have the time and I finish, and the laptop closes. Now, I am working from home, and my work life hasn't changed in that I spend most of my time working from home anyway. I can work remotely or anywhere, have laptop, will travel. What this has done is it's structured exactly what happens, when it happens. And then when 6 o'clock comes, I'm really strict on myself. No, that's it. I go for a cycle or I go for a walk. Or instead of doing a deep dive into, I don't know, Strictly Got Dancing videos on YouTube in the space while you're between 2 Zoom calls, instead of doing that in the 15 minutes, just go for a walk. You can do that now because you're at home, or go down and play with Jake, my son, you know, kick a ball around or something. So yeah, I think it's
in a way your kids have helped, but both Pamela and Hassan, your children have helped you re-engineer your life a little bit, or refactor your life a little bit.
Yeah, I would say absolutely. Definitely, yeah.
That's nice to think about. And Chris, do you have any reflections on your working life now that?
Yeah, I suppose mine has changed differently, very differently as well. I would probably, you know, I suppose not be as positive as Hass and Pam, unfortunately. I found very much the lockdown affected me quite a lot in the beginning. So I went into a phase of sitting on the sofa doing absolutely nothing, unfortunately, for quite literally weeks at a time, which was very unpleasant, really. And no, I shook that off eventually, and it was fine. I got back to work, and then when I got back to work, I went straight back into it, as Hass and Pam will laugh, because I sent them over the course of many weeks. But I decided to rip apart my maker room and put it back together in a different way. So that was a project that kind of got me off of my bum in order to get up and move around and do things. But since then, you know, it's kind of been full steam ahead, no pun intended, or perhaps the pun should be intended. But it's been great actually now, because, you know, I suppose I was a bit distressed and depressed before, because there was all of this free time that I had and a plethora of things that I wanted to do, but didn't actually get to any of them. But what I did eventually do was, which gave me the incentive, which was, you know, take apart my maker room and put it back together. And now that has turned into, you know, something I'm really proud of and delighted about. And that has also given me the impetus to to, I suppose, rethink how things are done from a point of view of doing things remotely, because clearly it's very difficult to put little pieces of almost anything into a student's hands to get them to do something. And we're working on that at the moment of a good way to do that, and we've done a number of kind of video tests and things like that, and no more than Pam herself has done the origami videos and things like that, which look amazing, and Hass has done some stop motion videos and things like that as well too. So we've kind of little by little over the course of things, I suppose for myself personally, I've dragged myself out of that. And with the two other lunatics there, we're all kind of putting together stuff, to move forward into the next phase, whatever that is. And hopefully we'll get to some point in time where that phase becomes face-to-face again, but for the moment, it's all online.
Sounds like initially that it was a little bit of a struggle for you there. I would say many people listening would resonate with that as well. And it's in your case, your local community of Pamela and Hassan are obviously were pretty important in helping you maybe break out of that pattern that you were probably initially settled in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, we might have a podcast about that in the future, because it has been under COVID. Yeah, sure, it's an opportunity to do new things, but you need to be in the right mental space to embrace that and take that. And for many people, there's been so much change and so much uncertainty that it caused a lot of anxiety and, I suppose, and associated issues that some people have struggled to free themselves from. So that's an interesting thing to think about, Chris.
I think one thing that helped me, and this is a simple thing. It's great having our community of three. But every morning I don't know why this came about, but every morning we send each other one track from Spotify.
No way.
Every single morning. We have a playlist on Spotify. So, I mean, if I really want to announce all the amazing things that we're doing, and Makerspace, and we're gone online, and MakerMeetIE. But our most successful project is our playlist with 300 songs on it.
Wow.
We forward each other every morning, and it's only 3 songs.
Well, can you share that playlist? Maybe this is what we need to...
I think Pam should be all over that.
I'm more than happy to do that. Yeah. More than happy to do that.
And it's an eclectic playlist, and it can reflect. So the morning playlist, I'm a sucker for putting on something uplifting in the morning, because I just want to be out. But every now and then you notice, if you share something in the afternoon, it could be more pensive, or it could be a slower piece. And at nighttime then, Chris will pull something out of, I don't know where, left.
Imagine.
So it's really an amazing little playlist. But what it's done is it's enabled us, without having the daily good morning or hello, it's enabled us, it's a nod, it's a hat tip, it's how you keeping, checking in, the end.
That's a lovely idea.
That is very nice.
That's been really important, I think. And just coming back on I think we all, all three of us, I think it's probably fair to say, did struggle a bit, no more than everyone did. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We've never been in the middle of anything like that before. And I know I found it difficult in the beginning, because I found I was on my phone all the time looking at COVID and watching the news and waiting for the numbers and all of that. And actually I took up origami in a big way again. I had origami, actually I learned origami for the first time at Dublin Maker in 2016, I can't remember which one. I went as a tourist that year, and then we've been there as an exhibitor since then. But I learned origami there, and that got me through my son starting to go out, and it all went a little bit crazy when he but it actually keeps your mind and your hands busy, and that is what origami did. And I have boxes, literally I'm sitting here looking at boxes of origami, because they take up a lot of space. It really does take up a lot of space, to the point where I started sending it out to people just to kind of get rid of some of it from my house. But you can only send 2D bits. But I think it's really important to find something that does ground you in these times. And I think everyone, we're baking. I'm not a baker. I've now become a baker with my daughter. And again, it's kind of finding things to do with the people in your house and broader and whatever. But it is really important. But yeah, the playlist has just been you know, the Sunday vibe is very different to the Monday vibe, is very different to the, you know, it's captured things that have happened, you know, people who have died since and all that, you know, it's all of that. And it's the three of ours eclectic mix. It's a little bit crazy. It's really good. It's really good. It's fun.
Right, we will have to hear that. Now, if we were ever had the funds, we would play out on one of the most requested track on your playlist. But,
there's a lot of them on there. A lot of songs.
I don't know. We're certainly over 300 at this point, I think, aren't we?
Yeah.
What's today's track?
I'll tell you now. I'm looking at it here on my phone. Chris was this morning's DJ. Burning Down the House.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah. Small bit of Talking Heads, I felt was good.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
That should be played in the background of our podcast.
Yeah.
or in or out.
If you want to reduce your origami reserves there of paper, I think that sounds like Chris might have a solution.
All right.
It always comes back to fire. It always comes back to fire, you see.
If I get any more origami paper in the post, I think I might actually be thrown out of my house at the moment. But anyway.
We're probably gonna wrap up around now. So if there's finally, is there anything the listeners should look forward to from MakerMeet you know, for the rest of the year or in the coming year? I know you said that you know, you're looking forward to kind of in-person events, and given that, you know, there's like the summer period is before school term starts, so it's like still July and August. Will you be doing anything, or are you planning anything for, you know, the nearer to the latter quarter of this like the winter time of this year?
Sure, yeah. So yeah, we've been making plans, not necessarily just for Nigel, but making plans anyway, and lots of different things. So as I was saying, kind of touched on a little bit earlier, is that we're looking at doing kind of online things, and we've done a number of tests because it's obviously quite difficult to do something with a group of people online. One thing that we have discovered, and I'd say that everybody has discovered worldwide, is that, you know, we've all had our Zoom meetings or Google Meet meetings or Microsoft Teams meetings. It doesn't really matter what it is, but through all of those, you know, we all get earphone burn after a while, just because, you know, your head feels like it's going to start to explode. So we're trying very much to simplify things and limit things. And I suppose to that extent, we've gone down the route of doing maybe a 3-way or perhaps even 4-way plan. And that is nothing radical, I don't think, but it's just, I suppose we're going to put up many videos, and that started off with all of Pam's origami, but we're going to put up many videos of little maker projects, not necessarily how to make them, but what they look like and how they work, and perhaps a quick way to do them. And we're going to augment that with PDF files that can be downloaded, including supplies, time, things like that. There's some of those up on the website already. And then hopefully what we're going to do is we're going to have little live maker sessions, but we're going to try our very best to limit those to 15 minutes to 30 minutes at the absolute most, just because we have gotten feedback from some students, you know, and parents that have said, you know, look, we love what you did, but really 20 minutes in, the kids got up and kind of just wandered off because, you know, and I don't see that as anything that we've done, but, you know, in reality, unless they're forced to sit there, you know, attention span is very, very difficult to a one-dimensional electronic device, I think. So the hope is that between all three of those ways of looking at creating something in a maker way, we'll be doing that. And then the kind of fourth hidden way that we might or might not, we haven't explored this too much yet, is creating little packs. You know, so that, you know, look, we might, there's a build a bridge project. We'll send you a pack of the required materials. You don't even need them. But even at that, most of the things we try to do, materials are available everywhere. We have a friend of mine. One of the things we have up is looking at the pH balance of things, and I gave her very strict guidelines that she had to create the project using household materials, and she certainly did it. She's a chemist, and she certainly did it. So she's used red cabbage and window washing liquid and all kinds of other things to create the lovely rainbow effect of a pH balance. So things like that, yeah. So is what will be coming over the course of between now and Christmas, really.
Great. Do you have a website that people can go to?
Sure, yeah. It's just www. Although that's not required in any website anymore for most people's information, but it's MakerMeet, MakerMeet.ie. Fantastic.
So thank you all for coming on board on our podcast, Dublin Maker Podcast, and speaking with us. That was a lot of fun. And thanks, Tomas, for co-hosting as well.
Sure, it's fun.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us.
Yeah.
It was great,
Thanks
and we hope to see everybody again soon in Dublin Maker next year.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Remember to hit subscribe to our podcast. We are also on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Take care, stay safe, and this is Vicky signing off from the Dublin Maker Podcast.